and I'm just going to welcome you all. Welcome to this session. This is the last session of mine in this International Week of Happiness at Work, and Mr. David Bellamy is going to talk about the hidden power of employees' voices. And I think it will be really interesting, as I know David, and I have known him for several years now. And as I was saying earlier, please, you can turn on your cameras, or you can just be not on camera, but feel free to comment or participate in the discussions. And I think that I will leave the floor to you, Mr. Bellamy.
Thank you very much. Listen, thank you for inviting me along to talk. As you said, I'm talking about employee voices. Right. So I'm David Bellamy, founder and CEO of Hearken. We are an organization that specializes in employee voice. How can we help organizations hear more of what matters to their people? And of course, what that means in terms of implications for how people feel at work. I was saying to heading before you all joined, I've done hundreds of these things. I still get super nervous, right? So it would be helpful for me today, and I've put plenty of places in here for a bit of interaction. I much prefer doing these things in person. So I'm posing questions as we go through. It'd be great if you want to put your cameras on and voice responses, or indeed just use the chat and share comments would be great. That's it really. I think I'm just going to canter through and talk about employee voice, why it matters, and what we can get from it. And then I'm going to share some of our experience, really a sort of guide to what should you be doing around employee voice to activate more of them. All right. So it's the end of International Week of Happiness at Work, and I thought the best place for us to start was, why does employee happiness even matter? That's the first question. So I wouldn't mind anybody want to share any views or put something in the chat?
I mean, I'd say it's important to engage with your employees, because it's about their well-being, and kind of, communication is a really key theme within the service as a whole, and especially within those who are leading teams, to ensure that you communicate, ensure that your team are happy. The data is there. I'm sure we'll go into it. Hearing employees' voices and people being happy leads to more productive, productive staff.
Yep, spot on, David. Spot on. Helga, again, absolutely right. You spend so much time and energy at work, it pays for it to be somewhere that, at very least, doesn't suck, right? I mean, I think that's the bar is set terrifically low right now. It matters, of course, because your organization's ability to execute on its strategy, deliver on its goals, it's all intrinsically tied to that thing we hear a lot, our most important asset, our people, right? But nothing happens if we don't have the right people in the right environment doing their best, right? And that's all we can ask of people. This is, of course, the talent strategy, but of course, for us, and I think it should mean much more to organizations in terms of culture and leadership. And yet, the current reality is starkly different, I should say, for many people. I'm not going to quote the stats, but engagement, as we hear every year from Gallup, with their state of the global workplace, year after year after year, tells us how bad it is. And this year I was staggered. I've done this in some other talks. I'll just take a little pop quiz. So this year, global engagement reached a record high, right? What's that number, right? What number did it reach? Because I think as a record high, that's something worth talking about. Any suggestions, guesses? Does anybody know the answer? Ada Core, that's a terrific guess. Yeah, 23 is the year, the number this year, right? And the reason that's worth pointing out is that if that's the record high, 23% of employees are engaged at work, then we are doing something drastically wrong, aren't we? When you get to the UK, by the way, it's 5. I think it's 14 or something in the US, and the number's absolutely staggeringly low. Stress is high and increasing. Burnout is on the rise still. and we keep hearing people talking about culture as toxic. So there's an awful lot that is not working for us in the workplace, and that should be an urgent call for action. And so have you ever heard this expression? You have two ears, which is the sort of the listening theme, of course, but you have two ears and one mouth, right? So we use that expression, don't we, with children, right? We use it, I mean, when I started in sales, it was one of the first things you get taught. You've got two ears and one mouth, use them in proportion. And yet, I mean, back to the point you were making, David, a moment ago, comms is really important. So that's really important. But for most organizations, it's broadcast. Right? And I always emphasize this. So with one of our clients recently, they were doing a sort of an evaluation of lots of their technology stack. And one of the guys came back and just said, look, it's really interesting going through this. So we've got countless tools to talk to our employees. Slack, Yammer, Teams, Intranet, and all these other things, right? And we actually only got one where employees can talk safely back to us, and that's Harken. And I thought that was really interesting. So that point about the way that we listen in organizations is still very much dominating on the broadcast. Let's tell people what we want, communicate in one direction, and there isn't enough opportunity for people to talk back. So on that note, question 2. I'm looking to the people who have yet to contribute to this chat online. Let's have some comments. How good is your company or a company you've worked in the past? How good are they listening to you? So do you feel heard? Do you feel safe to speak up? What, you know, how good is it where you work right now or where you have worked? How well listened to do you feel? I wonder if I could hang this out until somebody leaves a comment. Brilliant, thank you. So listen, but no change. Okay, no outcome. Not working with anybody but myself in previous place. Yes, well, very much so. That's interesting, Helga. Not really good, just yearly surveys. That's another issue. Helga, I'd love to hear, would you mind just on that? Because that's a very much a sort of counter to normal view. Can you share anything about how and why your company made you feel well heard?
I think I was teaching at this school, and I think I was also in charge of a new implementation of a way of doing things. So I had to be really open about my opinions, because to change something, and my boss just trusted me for it. That's why she hired me. So I think that was kind of the idea, that I would come in and shake things up. So I felt that I could go and I could, you know, I was listened to. But I've had it different, of course, in other companies. But in this case, I think it's because I had this role that I was important to kind of keep me good. So I would continue doing what I was doing and influence. But I did hear a lot of people in the workplace talking about not feeling heard. So I was sometimes thinking, why do I not feel like that? You know, what is the difference? But I think it's because of the role that I had. That must have been the reason. But like I said, I have no idea.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting thing, and plays to some of the other points. You know, so the not periodic listening and listening without any reaction or response, no outcome, no change. Those are the things that people are used to, and I'm going to cover some of the reasons why. I think, like many things associated with organizational culture, so much of it can be unique to us, right? We all make sense in a different way. I think that just on that, this is not something I was really planning on talking about, but that when we think about organizational culture, there's no agreed definition of culture, of course, but probably the best one that exists out there is the way that we do things around here. And the interesting thing about that is that the we and around here are constantly changing. So one of the things I've been exploring over years is, why is it that leadership has such a different perspective when it comes to culture than everybody else in the organization? And one explanation for that could be that, of course, that if you think about how our culture manifests in the way that we behave and the way that we show up, the we changing all the time. So when I'm with my immediate colleagues and my friends at work, I behave one way. When I'm with other people, I'll behave differently. And of course, when leadership are around, we behave entirely differently. So the around here, when leadership is in the room, means that they'll see culture totally differently. It just doesn't work like that for most of us. So anyway, but I think that unique experience is important. And so before I get into more about the sort of how we can listen, why should we listen to why should we be listening more to employees? What's the point? What do we get from it? Again, I'm looking to chat. This is not coming to a talk so you can do all the sharing of insight, but I think this is interesting to get perspectives.
Well, I think the why is because, I liken it, with staff, the people, your employees are the people who are driving your business culture. Companies, sorry. Yeah, I mean, they're exactly, and as Selma just mentioned in the chat, it's about the direct feedback. Where a lot of companies, and I don't know any companies in particular, go wrong is they say, well, we need to, there's this problem, we need to fix it. And so what we'll do is we'll go and buy a load of consultants, and we'll bring consultants in, and we'll pay them a lot of money when, Alan and Alison in your marketing department have the answer, you just haven't asked them. And then they know what, your employees know what's going to work, and it's about having that dialogue and saying what's going well, what's not working, what can we do better. And it's also about ownership. That's another thing as to the why is, employees will be more in tune with it and want to buy in more if you involve them and hear their voices and say, we're hearing what you've said. Okay, based upon what you've said, we're going to do this. Oh, okay. Rather than being top down. It's like when somebody says, you are going to do this, we automatically cross our hands and cross our hands and say, no, I'm not going to do that. But if we involve people, they're more likely to want to buy in and kind of want to be involved. It's about, not telling, but involving.
Spot on, David. I think that's exactly right. And so everything you've said, I think, is absolutely on the money. Employees know the issues that face your business because they face them every day, right? They're the ones dealing with customers. They're the ones using the systems, the tools, and everything that you've put in place. And they are in the best place to tell us exactly where the bottlenecks, the issues, the risks facing our organization are. But they're also the ones with the ideas and the opportunities. And I think you're again spot on when you think about, I spent 25 years as a management consultant, and of course, all of that means, but as you get older, you sort of realize it's a crazy model to bring in externals all the time. I'm not sort of saying that there's no role for consultancy, don't get me wrong, but using consultants to do heavy lifting in your organization trains them with all, develops their muscles, and then they leave, and your organization is not better for it, and you get all the resistance that David's referred to. But also, of course, so employees know what's going on the coal face. Employee sentiment, so engagement, happiness, well-being, and there's a whole bunch of other words we might use that catch sentiment as well. They all correlate directly with the business outcomes we're looking for. So every report, and we don't have to go through them because we've all read them before, but we know engagement, sales, customer service, satisfaction, and whatever you want to do, retention, belonging, all those things improve. And the business improves, the health of the organization is all directly linked to how our employees are feeling. And this last point, and this sort of pays to the thing that, again, David was referring to. Decision making relies heavily on our ability to make sense of things, right? So the better information that we can present, and again, I'll just come back to that point I made about leadership a moment ago and culture. If my sense of an organization when I walk around it as the CEO is that everybody's happy, and that when I ask for things to happen, they happen quickly, that must be what everybody else's day is like. Then you can get a distorted view. And so actually relying on employee feedback directly from the floor, as Selma points out, helps us to make sense of things. And of course, that ultimately helps us make better decisions. It helps us take more aligned action, particularly if we can make that transparent and open for everybody. So what stops people from speaking at work? Again, back to the chat, please, and more feedback. What things stop us from speaking freely at work? We've seen some of them in the chat already, but suggestions, thoughts? Yeah. Spot on. Consequences.
I would say also where employees don't feel that there's psychological safety. I know that the point was just made, but again, if the culture isn't there where people feel that they can speak up, that can always hinder people wanting to speak.
Yeah. Again, absolutely right. I mean, feeling a lack of empowerment, I think, is the other point that's been made. Is afraid of consequences. Spot on. Lack of empowerment to do anything about it. The permission-based cultures often suffer with that, and they don't care enough to speak up. Yeah, Helena, I don't know if that's something that might be true. Apathy can emerge in cultures, particularly where people don't feel listened to or nobody cares about them. So that care is a mutually reinforcing thing. But so some of the things, safety. So what are the consequences of speaking up? And I think this applies to lots and lots of different things. History is littered with examples of organizations. Don't get me on quiet quitting. But they say safety. What are the consequences of speaking up? Yeah, history is littered, with organizations that didn't listen to their employees. And of course, you see these case studies where people were trying to raise issues, wrongdoing, corporate malfeasance, those sorts of things, well-being concerns. There's lots and lots of reasons why we don't speak up. And actually, that makes us quite naturally wait until we're in crisis, right? So people don't speak up until they're absolutely desperate to. And I think in the round of that, of course, is individual voices can often get lost in that. It's easier to dismiss a single view. And so that we learn not to speak, and that's it. And I think there are lots of elements to psychological safety that we have to try to pick apart. There's an idea that organizations can make psychological safety just by the way leadership approaches things, but actually it doesn't work quite like that. That human nature to not speak up in crowds where we don't know people, in large organizations, this gets very complex, or complicated. Bias, another thing, right? So do all voices have equal weight? Now, this is something I'm learning about, right? So I know that unconscious bias training has been going on a long time, but since we've been working in Harkin and we've been developing this tool to help people have a voice at work, one of the things that's really emerged for me is the difference in the way that, so it comes a little bit back to the point that Helga, you were making before, right? So sometimes it's a positional thing. Sometimes it can be other reasons, right? But so for me, as a white male, when I was in my 20s, I was talking to a client about this, like a CEO of one of our clients, and we were discussing the fact that in our 20s, we could comfortably walk up to the CEO and say, you know what, the strategy's rubbish. This is what you should do, right? And you didn't get greeted with aggression or shut up, who are you? You'd get an arm around you. Oh, you're a good guy, one of us, he's going places, and you'd have a positive conversation. I tested that with a female chief people officer of one of our clients. And said, how was yours? What's your experience? And she said, well, actually, I did that at a conference and I didn't get a metaphoric hand in the face. I got a physical one. Go away. I'm not listening to you. I'm not interested in your opinion. And what's interesting about that, of course, is we realize that, and so I'm talking about women here as one example, because it's a vast majority of workplaces in terms of, or a large proportion of workplaces, put it that way, where people don't feel safe to speak up. And certainly, that idea that your voice carries less weight. And I think this is the same for lots and lots of populations and minority groups at work in particular. So people end up not saying anything. So I think that's a really interesting thing. And for us, again, there are mechanisms that you can use to get past this, but it's really important to make sure we're hearing from everybody. And that last point, mechanism, how does your company enable voice? So, we touched on periodic surveys. We've touched on sort of some of the other things. So that the nature of listening once in a while means that there are formal mechanisms and perhaps not so many others. So this sense of how the organization both enables voice and listens become really important, because if I'm going to be the only person speaking up in a room, then fine. But people who are maybe able to process information less quickly or like to reflect or indeed don't have the confidence to speak up, intercultural differences playing a role, some cultures bottom up feedback less. Yeah, so actually some of that, so that's a really interesting point. Yeah, Mary, terrific, right? So and it isn't, so I'm certainly, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do periodic surveys. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying we have to think about balancing out some of these tools with other mechanisms so that we get to hear richness. The thing about intercultural, we're working with an Indian organization at the moment, and so just as a cultural thing, so one of the questions they posed us is, at a certain level in their organization and below, nobody speaks. Right, so culturally deeply ingrained in them not to challenge, not to say anything that contradicts the norm. And so they've said, look, if you can activate the voices of our employees, then we're going to be lifelong friends. And that's something we're working on. One of the interesting things that came out of that, back to the point I made before, was one of the ladies in that organization sent us a note just saying, look, what I love about Harken is it's about what's being said, not who's saying it. And I think that's a really interesting thing. It was a brilliant bit of feedback for us. Golda, I want to, Devon, what's Speak Up Guardian?
Sorry, in NHS, we do have a Speak Up Guardian. So they can, if you have any issues, you can speak to them, and they will liaise with the concerned party so that you can get some feedback from them. And the one other thing you were saying, David, yes, in India, there's a certain levels when they come down, they won't speak up. But it happens wherever you go internationally. As the minority and as a woman, I face these challenges quite a lot.
Yep.
Whatever you want to say, and it's not what you say, it's who you say and to whom you say.
Yeah.
Even though you had a valid point, but it won't be considered until you got a different color or a different gender. That's what in my experience. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that. I think so. I am aware of the Speak Up Guardians. Thank you. That was I think you're absolutely right. And so these are the sorts of challenges we've got to uncover, because if we want organizations to hear more of what matters, to get ideas, because we're not talking only about problems, of course, we're talking about the ideas and the opportunities that face companies too. And I think, Mary, I just want to pick up on that point about decent follow-up as a result of the survey findings. Yeah, I agree. So there's lots of good examples of this. One of the things that we think that companies could do better as well as that, though, of course, is introducing that real time and not so structured. So it becomes less about what the company wants to hear from you and more about what you want to talk about. But also, one of the opportunities in activating voice in a different way is that we're enabling, I guess, more of a democratization process. So we end up with, rather than the you said we did thing that often follows from surveys, although that's good, lots of voices are lost. If I don't happen to agree with enough people in questions, then perhaps my voice doesn't ever get heard. And that's another thing we're just trying to make sure we get to. The net result of all of this stuff, so when we have these problems with listening, and most organizations, large organizations do, we don't hear enough of what matters, and certainly not soon enough. So issues are kept from leadership. In bad news travels terrifically slowly inside companies. It gets filtered. We've got some great case studies of major incidents in organizations where the leadership is hearing it's fine, it's okay, there's some minor grumblings, but actually what Harken was showing them was actually there's some really significant challenges here. And it's only because you take out the layers of filtering, which is, again, is not fault of anybody, it's human nature in hierarchies to do that, but you're speeding up the nature of information getting to the top. People wait until they're in crisis before seeking help. Is a really common thing we see, particularly around well-being. And of course, people feel, thank you, Helga, thank you for your contribution. People feel unheard, undervalued, and insignificant as a result of this. So, we've got a camera. Are we going to a new camera card? Maybe it's just because I've only got 4 pictures. Ada Court. I don't know what you don't know your first name. Excuse me for using your whole name like that. Were you going to say something? Oh, okay. Sorry, you just appeared on my screen, so I thought you were about to speak. Sorry. So how can you hear more of what matters? Look, so here's what we think is most important and how Harken does it. So this is not product pitch by any means, but it's just, here's what we've learned about listening and how you can activate voices of employees. So continuous engagement through dialogue. So one of the things that we touched upon, and I know that we've heard some examples here of where periodic pulse surveys or annual surveys can deliver great results for sure. But episodic data capture methods, focus group surveys, actually, so they create some positive outcomes for sure, but they leave many people feeling unheard. So we really think that it's about creating ongoing dialogue between employees and leadership. So can we create a sense of this is what my day-to-day is like? And Harken actually came from that. We used to be a management consulting firm under a different name. It was my business, and one of the exercises we would run when we were working with leadership teams was around culture. And interestingly, when you'd ask them, what does your culture look like if it were perfect, what would it look like? They'd draw pictures and, come up with these great descriptions of what work would be like. And then what's it like today? And they'd draw some different, less glossy pictures. And then we would show them what the staff had said when we asked them what it was like to work there. And that was where all the fighting started, because they realized how different it was. And the leading hypothesis we came into this business with was actually we have to get better at understanding day-to-day life, what's going on for people inside organizations. And over time, we've developed into this ongoing dialogue model where anonymized conversations means that we're getting insights up into the organization, but of course, also collective and transparent sense making that helps everybody live and work through challenging and changing context. Touched on this already, focusing on enhancing psychological safety. And by the way, sorry, just to say, if you've got questions or you want to interrupt me on any of these things, please do. All right, I'm just cantering through some of our perspectives here, focusing on enhancing psychological safety. If you want to hear how people are feeling, what's really going on, then we've got to ensure it's safe for them to share, right? And so that means we've got to eradicate the consequences. And for us, so creating confidential channels and uninhibited expression of feedback, concerns, ideas. So free form, completely anonymized dialogue, even down to, so within Harken, we have things like a sort of raise your hand button. So it would be a bit like reaching out to a Speak Up Guardian Golda, where I can hit a button and I can then engage in a one-to-one dialogue with somebody else, but I stay anonymous throughout. The other person, I'd know who I was talking to on the other side, but my side of the conversation stays completely anonymous. And that means that we get people to put their hands up about all sorts of different issues much, much sooner. And this is not about whistleblowing. It's about getting into positions where we can get access to information that we can use to drive our business forward positively. Real-time insights for agile decision making. How salesy a message is that, right? But actually, so the world is increasingly dynamic. We think it's quicker, don't we? It feels like it is for most of us. Getting access to this stuff, again, you come back to where we started. Periodic insights give us one set of views, but actually understanding what's going on live makes a difference. So we're actually working with a company right now that's going through a restructure. And the value of real-time insights, watching an organization deal with redundancies, restructuring that are affecting lots of people is fascinating. And it guides leadership behavior in a host of different ways, because, of course, they're starting to understand what the sentiment is like on the ground, and contrasted with what they think they're hearing in their natural mechanisms, where they think actually people are okay. There's a great deal of pain and discomfort in the organization, which then needs to guide communication strategy and the way we lean into provision of care, for example, and making sure our people feel valued. But it doesn't apply only in those instances. If we've got, in any context, there's a systems fault that's preventing customers from getting what they want, this sort of information happening quickly starts to get to the point where we can not only reduce the stress that our individual employees feel, but actually move the whole collective forward. Embracing the spectrum of employee experiences. Again, that point I was making about our voices getting lost, for both bias reasons, but also just lost in survey. Continuous dialogue where everybody gets a voice and they're an equal voice. So that's a really interesting thing. So anonymized conversation does some interesting things for people. So we watch all the time. So without profiles or avatars, it's not like Twitter where you've got a handle or any of those sorts of things. You're just sharing your comments with and fully interactive. So you can engage in dialogue with other people, but not know who you're talking to. That levels organizations out in a terrific way. It means that everybody gets an equal view, because nobody can make a judgment on who's saying this. And so that makes a massive difference. And what it tends to do is activate those voices that we wouldn't otherwise hear from. So again, you probably gathered this from 30 minutes of listening to me already. I don't have a problem using my voice, right? I've never had a problem using my voice. I referred to it earlier on as well. If I was in a room with a bunch of people, I'm at my most comfortable and I will talk a lot. But there are loads of people that I've worked with over the years that I've never really appreciated this, don't find that so easy, right? And of course, so we don't hear from them in the room. We don't hear from other methods. And so consequently, we're only getting some perspectives, and that skews our view of what's really like inside our company. So, and I'll come back to that point as well about sense making. The more we make this transparent, the easier it becomes for us all to take collective action. Removing barriers to inclusion. Well, I just talked about that, so very similar point. Accessible and inclusive. The accessibility point here, and I've sort of alluded to it, something else that we're learning about, and I think workplaces are learning about this, of course, is I guess the neurodiversity aspect. So in days gone by, we would think about extroversion and introversion as the two spectrums, right? The two things, but actually we're all different. And the ability to use technology in particular for listening to people. So again, we get the value of anonymity, but the asynchronous nature of communication, particularly when we're working remotely, so the combination of asynchronous and anonymous does some fascinating things for groups. So it just means that we can take some of these important subjects and let them run over time, which gives people time to process, to speak safely and explore topics with their colleagues in a very grown-up way. And I think that's a really valuable aspect to take into any workplace. Employee well-being. So I touched on caregiving a moment ago. We know, don't we, that high pressure environments, sustained pressure, big change causes stress to spike. But it's kind of happening a lot at the moment, isn't it? So the blurring of home and work is making for people finding it hard to switch off. There's lots and lots of reasons. So and again, so rather than just listening for opinions on workplace itself, looking to monitor indicators of employee well-being and enabling peer-to-peer support. There's two aspects that are slightly different for us. One of the things we learned a few years ago through tracking this sort of sentiment stuff. So we ask people to check in and share how they're feeling and why they're feeling that way. So that's basically the sort of the kernel of Harken's capability. The first part, how you're feeling, is a rating process, which we use. We learned back in 2019 that we could see in data patterns people who were showing signs of early distress and possible burnout, to the extent that, well, we first saw that, by the way, after the event. So we knew some people had had some crises, and the data would have shown us. We now have algorithms that pick those things up immediately. So live well-being checks on everybody that checks into Harken. So we can just test if they're normal for that person. That's incredibly powerful. But the other thing that we've learned associated with this is, and aligned to that freeform narrative piece, is that people will share more about stuff that's going on for them and give early indication of possible struggles. Now, one of the things that we didn't anticipate, was the value of caregiving from peers. So when I talk about dialogue, watching colleagues completely anonymously, and we've got a wonderful case study on our website about this, a little video where a guy, I'll just tell the story quickly, but a guy goes onto Harken one day, rates 0. We use 0 to 100 scale, by the way. So a 0 is quite conscious, and you start at 50. So you have to choose to go one way or another. Rate 0, and then writes about, an ongoing struggle with mental health. I'll come back to that in a minute, Mary. I'll finish this story. I'm interested in what you're saying. But rate 0 talks about struggle with mental health and how something had happened yesterday that was tipping him into crisis. And what was fascinating was we watched 25 colleagues reply, all of whom were offering support, directing them to EAP support or suggesting counselling, and other people talking about their stories and experience. And at the very end of this thing, after sort of 24 hours, the original person came back and just, can I just say thank you? I've never really been able to share my struggles before, but I did so here because it felt safe. And the support you guys have given me has encouraged me to seek counselling. I booked a session. And that story ends when that individual approached the CEO of this company at an internal conference and walked up to him and said, "You've saved my life." And I thought that was terrific, because he just said, "You gave us this tool, and my colleagues, the support that my colleagues gave me got me into counselling, and it's transformed my life." And I thought that was amazing. And so that point, the peer-to-peer support enabled by colleagues makes such a difference. So and really leaning into care matters. Mary, I'm just going to look at your comments. So companies created and supports a wide range number of teams, channels. Yeah, terrific. And I think that's great, right? So there are lots and lots of great initiatives going on out there. And most companies, I think the thing that we've seen is most companies have terrific support for people who are struggling. The difficulty most have is accessing it quickly enough. So there's lots of stuff when we know somebody's in crisis. And because we've talked about already, people not really being willing to talk about it early enough. And that's just one of the benefits that we see to the point about anonymity, in particular, encouraging that earlier sense making and earlier reaching out for help that just gets us to the support where it's most valuable. But great comment. I've talked about this already. So the way that we do it, so stories and sentiments provide the color, so that but numbers can give you a different understanding. So really checking into, so we use metrics through that check-in routine to be able to demonstrate to leadership in particular the sentiment of their organization at any one moment in time. And although this is International Week of Happiness at Work, we actually started life as a company called Happiness Lab. So that was the first version of our product, was called Happiness Lab. And we rebranded because we realized that actually we're more about listening. Hearken means to listen attentively. But we also moved away slightly from the idea of happiness at work in that capacity in the way we measure it, because we found that for many managers in particular, they found it challenging to be, when we were faced with the idea of other people being happy, whereas what we tend to report now and the way we produce the data really starts to build out the idea of more good days and fewer bad days at work. So that's really the idea. We're all up and down on a continuum, right? Our lives are going on. What we want is for people to have fewer bad days at work and more good days. It takes the pressure off the idea that we have to be happy all the time. And then democratizing culture through transparency. I think this is such an important point, and it's come up through some of the other things I've said. So when we make transparent this information, so we know that often, there's lots of survey tools out there and the like that work very similar to this now. But certainly go back a few years and you do your survey, your responses would go off, it would be a black box, and then they'd come back as some initiatives sometime later and nobody could remember what they said. And it all felt a long time ago and the world feels different. But the thing about sharing, giving everybody live access to the same information that you're sharing. So again, protecting identities, but making sure you can see what's going on for colleagues makes such a difference, not just for leadership, of course, because they can see what's going on, but it helps with this idea of sense making. So is my experience that shared with others? We experience work differently, all of us for sure. And talking to our colleagues and understanding their view helps us to understand a bit more about the environment we're in. It reduces this idea of misinformation and rumor. It's one of the things that companies really worry about. What if somebody says something that's not true? Well, actually, that we found that colleagues will correct and nudge and align and evaluate, if you like, what they're saying, so that you end up with a better understanding of where everybody is right now. But it increases belonging, decreases insecurity and insignificance. That was another thing I mentioned earlier on. So this sort of idea of connecting one another through anonymous dialogue about our workplace starts to galvanize our communities much more strongly. So this sort of idea really is saying, look, there's a different way of listening, prioritizes psychological safety and inclusion and well-being, and it can be transformative, particularly during periods of unrest or uncertainty and change. And I think ultimately, so one of the big sort of takeaway for us is that what we think this becomes, it's back to that relationship, dialogue between leadership and employees, a better understanding of what's really going on is about relationship building. Too often, and we talk about this a great deal at Hearken, too often what companies are asking of us all of the time, they're making big asks, big requests, there's change coming, be resilient, manage your way through it, constantly, live through the change that we are having to deal with. But it's like having a phone call from your friend who only ever phones you when they need something, right? So it's like, I don't have a dialogue with you any other time. I've got this once in a while I get to speak to you, and normally speaking, you're only asking me to do stuff when you want me to do something. And it's a building this relationship where we actually are starting to recognize that relationships that we have with people at work, not just between us and our manager, but between the organization as an entity and its employees more generally, we start to recognize that relationship needs to be much more like the ones that we have in the rest of our lives. That treating each other like grown-ups, being respectful, being mindful of our needs and all that sort of stuff, because we just couldn't get away in our private lives with the sorts of things that we expect of employees to offer. So that's our take on employee voice, and I would love to hear any further thoughts. Look at that, 43 minutes, I've done well. I'll stop sharing and come back to the room and see if anybody has any questions or observations. Thank you for the active contribution on the side, by the way. I really appreciated that. It made it much easier to navigate through that sort of stuff. I've got de court. I feel weird saying that, excuse me, on my screen still. Any thoughts, observations, questions?
I have one.
Oh, please.
The drive, like what nowadays, isn't it like I was writing down like belonging, but you have come into that, and the drive, you know, what is it that makes you want to go to work? Like there is not only the drive of money and getting paid every month, but like you want to be valued,
yeah,
and all sorts of stuff in that kind of sense. It's just because if you they don't value me, like why should I show up, or like how it is?
Well, I think that you know, whether we well, let's just pick that back to the first one, and I think it came up in one of the very first comments on the screen for me, you know, which was we spend so much time there, and I think I responded by saying let's just not make it suck, right? Let's not imagine for a second that people would go to work if it were for free, unless you're volunteering, right? That we're not showing. So we are going to work because that's a relationship commercially between us and employer. We want to earn fair wages. That's why we you know, it's a fundamental part of our lives. That we feel valued when we're there. That we work on something with purpose. That we feel connected to our colleagues. That I feel like a decent human being, and all that sort of stuff become really important ways to maximize the performance of me as an individual, and me not tuning out and doing that thing that people call quiet quitting, which I desperately dislike. Thank you, Golda. Appreciate your contribution. Good luck.
Thank you, Golda.
Drives me, for me, what drives me is my team. Yeah, and it is close a connection to our colleagues, and I think so. There's lots of reasons that enable us to be at our best at work. I think at an organizational level, we have to think about, well, what, you know, the talent strategy piece. Right? How do I attract, nurture, retain talent? And companies spend a lot of time on the attracting talent. Right? We need, you know, but young people in particular right now want a voice at work. They don't want to go to work. And I remember 5 or 6 years ago, a client telling me that, you know, they bring young people into their organization. They said it was a matter of weeks before you see the lights go out, when they sort of realized that, oh my God, is this it? You know, I've come in from university. Is this it for the next 40 years? And it's terrifying, right? And I think that what drives me is my team, the people I work with directly. I think that's such an important point. One of the things I'd love to see happen more, it's partly why I think managers get such a bad rap. You know, why is it that we read all these articles about that we don't leave companies, we leave a bad boss? Well, is that because that's the only relationship we have? Really, I don't mean, you know, so we're colleagues, but I mean that actually once we've gone through that onboarding process, there's very little meaningful relationship or connection to an organization in lots of respects. And so we end up, of course, where psychological safety is most important in our direct team. But I think it's really important that as an organization, philosophically, we start to think about the value. Sama, thank you very much. So I think there's lots in this, but I think drive, you know, this is where you say, how do I get the best out of people? Well, you just want, you know, I want to work on some good stuff with some great people, feel like I'm valued, and get paid fairly, right? And there's loads more. Well.
I mean, I would definitely say it's about being collaborative. I mean, one of the things that's really come out of the presentation and the shares of everybody is it's about the collaborative. You know, you made mention there of, you know, people don't leave, you know, they leave bad managers. You know, it's about the collaborative. You know, what you hear with a lot of bad leaders is it's the I and the ego. You know, I'm doing really well, and the team, you know, and it's all about me, and I'm the star of the show, when that's simply not the case within culture. You know, it's about the collective. You know, it doesn't work about the people, you know, the circle, as it were. There is not one person who is, more important than the collective. And it's about that team culture, I would say.
I agree. And yeah, exactly right. And that ties back, doesn't it, really closely to this idea of us all having such vastly different experiences at work. One of the things that we see an awful lot, there's a great deal of discussion about right now is this: where do we work? Right. So is it home? Is it office? And there's firm camps around, I'm better off at home. I'm really happy working at home. And there are other people who want to be around their colleagues and want to be in the office. And then there are some in the middle who are, isolation is a really big issue. And it's not just for people at home, by the way. There's lots of people who go to offices and still feel isolated. And those are all issues that are of the collective, experienced by individuals, but they impact the performance of the group. And it's that sort of sense, I think, that really, for me, that when employee voice is trying, certainly the way that we're approaching it at Harken, is trying to get at this idea. Look, we have to, through that anonymized bit that I talked about, that general sense of organization, can we accumulate and amalgamate information to build valuable insights at an organizational level, whilst also picking out the voice in 1,000 who needs some help. Right. So doing that is where the technology in particular has evolved for us. And we've been able to start to think about, again, building out individual experiences in a way that we foster inclusion and connection and belonging and caregiving, one of the biggest things we found, but also, trying to really harness. We activated voices first. That was the thing we learned to do. And I think our journey to strengthen the listening muscles, to strengthen the ears of the organization is still ongoing. There's a lot to be done, I think, because there's lots of perceived threat in allowing people to speak more freely at work, but actually mostly only amazing things happen.
Also the high hopes, like because you mentioned the university, of people are coming to the workplace, and you have these high hopes, and you are just like, I'm the champion, I got my degree or whatever, and then you meet the other employers and they say, yeah, been there, done that, and they like take you down a notch because don't think that you are. Like, I was like this back in the days, and then you hear like, don't think that you are somebody. So and I think that is dangerous, because you have this sense of, I can do anything, and then you get tired and you walk into a wall and just, oh no. And they sorry.
Listen, I think there are some things, kindness and respect. Helena, thank you very much. I think kindness and respect for other people, all those sorts of things. I'm not sure we could tackle everything, right? I had something happen to me, by the way. I remember as a young consultant early in my career, I was sitting in a room with some very senior people, and we were working on a strategy project, launching a new company for a big insurance firm. And now I was a marketing graduate, right? And so they were talking, we need to get a marketing expert to come and help us, build the marketing. And I sort of put my hand up and said, I did marketing at university, and they all laughed. I mean, that was the response. And I sort of something, what did I just say? And they said, well, just because you did it at university doesn't mean you know anything. And I thought, okay, the fact that I still remember that 20 plus years on speaks volumes, doesn't it? But I think, but I don't think we can expect organizational culture to eradicate all forms of poor behavior. What we've got to aim for is just higher standards, right? We've got to raise the bar a bit. And so certainly from a leadership, I could tell you, because that had a big impact on me, I would never do that to somebody joining my organization, just because I know. Now, the reality is they were probably right. No practical experience of doing anything like they were asking, but I was kind of putting my hand up and saying, I think, this is something I know a bit about. But anyway, that's by the point. I just think.
Yeah, but it's still about trial and error. Like you have to move on. You have to like do stuff, and then you have to, if you make an error, or okay, I'm not talking about, like, there must be somebody senior or whatever who guides you. Like Golda was talking about the guardian or something like. Yeah. So you have to dip your toe into failure.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I mean, there are stakes, aren't there? That when you're again at work, there are decisions and risks that people have got to weigh up. Who's the right person to do this? But look, all business, and I'm really clear on this, all business is a giant experiment. I know that we love certainty. We love the idea of having clear plans of action, all that sort of stuff. But the reality is we're arming ourselves with the best information possible to make judgments and decisions based upon that. And then we pull the lever, right? And the thing about complex adaptive systems, which all large organizations are, is you could pull the same lever tomorrow and something different would happen. Right. So that thing about making your best judgment and accepting that sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. I think we're a bit critical of all people, junior and senior, about the decisions we take and the outcomes we get, because actually many of them are unpredictable. You just got to try your best. And so again, one of those organizational learnings that people should be embracing is the idea that actually, learning fast is what people talk about, isn't it? Learning fast, failing fast, all that sort of stuff, but just picking up and the quicker you can get insight about what's really going on in your organization, comes back to that real-time point I made before, the more likelihood you have of adjusting decisions that need course correcting and making them better. Doesn't necessarily make them right, it will just make them better.
Sometimes they say that when you finish university, then you study, then your learning starts. So it's just like you have been putting stuff in your rucksack. And then when you get out, then you have to implement or see how it works and stuff.
I think I thought I knew most in my 20s. I turned 51 on Tuesday this week, and every day is still a school day, right? So I think that's the thing, isn't it? You've got the most energy, enthusiasm, passion. The most. You're most certain about everything, and then life teaches you stuff every day after that. Yeah.
Congrats on your birthday. Now we are almost on the top of the hour. Are there any thoughts by those of you who are left? Do you have any thoughts, comments, or questions for David? So please do put them in the chat. I think this has been a marathon speaking moment for David, isn't it? But he does it so well. I learn all time, every time I learn something new, as it is. It should be a school. So if you have some thoughts you want to put in the chat or maybe open the mic, then it would
for those people that haven't heard me before or came along not knowing what to expect, has it been helpful? If you don't say anything, I'm just going to assume that's a yes, by the way. All right.
That is.
Thank you very much.
Sometimes it's just good to listen, isn't it?
That's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah. So
thank you, Antonio.
Yeah. This is good.
All right, terrific. Okay. Yeah, awesome. Helen, thank you once again for inviting me to do this. Always great to see you. All right. And I'm off to watch the Ryder Cup now because Europe are beating America. It's golf, by the way, for anybody who doesn't know what the Ryder Cup is.
Yeah. It's golf. But yeah. I want to thank the participants, because it's just spread the word. We have to engage, and this is why I participate in the International Week of Happiness at Work, because I think that we all have stories and we need to share them, and we need to be open and all sorts of stuff. And as this is the last session, I really want to thank David for Mr. Bellamy, but I also thank David Pushkin for being here. But really, thank you very much, David, for giving us the time and talking about this. And I want you to, people, if you go to harken.com, isn't it?
Harken.com, or email me, david@harken.com, if you want to hear more, or if you'd like to take it for a spin in your own company, let me know.
Yeah. And you can join the company, you can join the community on harken.com, because then you can try it for yourself. I have been there for a long time, and then when my numbers went down, I think it took 3 days, then there was a question, how are you? Wow, I noticed that your bar was lowering, and I was oh no, thank you very much, but I just got sick, so I got the flu or something. So it was just that's why but I know it works. So feel free to try it, isn't it, David? You have to try it so you can, and it doesn't bother me that it's every day a question about how you feel every day, and you share it in your comment, why it was a good day or why it was a bad day or why you were under the weather. So thank you very much, guys. I will stop the recording now. And